Hello students, we are continuing the course of lectures on the subject of hygiene. Today we have the second lecture. The topic of our lecture you can see on the slides. Today we will talk about hygienic characteristics of atmospheric air, physical, chemical and biological parameters of air, their influence on human organism, sun radiation and its hygienic meaning, the weather, climate and macroclimate, the influence of getting worse modern ecological conditions of population health, specific properties of air or pharmaceutical premises, prophylactic measures directed to prevent the influence of air pollution. Atmospheric air is one of the major components of ecology of the person. During the ability to live, the person constantly adjusts to many factors of an environment where he lives, and these factors naturally render on organism of the person a certain influence. One of such factors, the person, closely adjoining in the atmospheric air. Air is the most necessary component for existence of human organism. Without it, the person can exist only within several minutes. During evolution, the person has adapted to existence in the air environment with certain properties, and consequently it is quite clear that the change of a chemical compound of this environment or its physical properties affects on states of health and serviceability of the person. The air environment of globe, named an atmosphere, is traced up to height about 1,000 kilometers above the surface of the ground. Properties of an atmosphere at various heights is different. Therefore, it is conditionally divided on some layers. The structure of atmosphere you can see on these slides: troposphere up to 14 kilometers, a stratosphere up to 40 kilometers, an ionosphere up to 600 kilometers, and vacuum sphere up to 1000 kilometers. The first layer, most nearly adjoining the surface of the ground, refers to as a troposphere and reaches up to height of 12 or up to 40 kilometers. As against others more highly located layers, it is characterized by the following properties. In troposphere, constantly there are daily and seasonal fluctuations of temperature. The troposphere is characterized by constant moving of the streams and even to various directions: horizontal, vertical, turbulent, and others. At troposphere, constantly, there is a significant amount of water streams causing formation of different phenomena, for example, cloud, fogs, and atmospheric precipitations. Next, the troposphere is characterized by the presence of rather significant amount of extraneous impurity, for example, firm, liquid, and gaseous pollution. In all overlying layers of an atmosphere, the temperature of air is always constant and does not vary dependent on time of day or a season of year. In air of this layer, horizontal moving air weights prevail. There are no water pairs, and therefore and the phenomena connected to them. For example, clouds, fogs. Practically, there are no characteristics for troposphere external impurity except for that insignificant pollution which act on the ground from space, space dust, and also pollution which are deserted in a stratosphere from a surface of the ground at some force measure. For example, at explosions of the nuclear weapon and large eruption of volcanoes. The troposphere is followed with a layer named stratosphere, which reached up to height about 100 kilometers. In a stratosphere, basically, they are horizontal moving air, which by virtue of that pollution getting in a stratosphere are distributed to the big distance and named global. The pollutions getting in a stratosphere have a number of features. By virtue of significant remoteness from a surface of the ground, they have rather small weight and therefore speed of subsidence of them is very insignificant. They are carried about horizontal streams of air on very big distance and practically distributed above all terrestrial surface that has given the basis to gain their global. This circumstance has played an essential role during the conclusion of the agreement on prohibition of tests of the nuclear weapon in an environment. Above a stratosphere, the layer named as ionosphere, which reached up to weight up to 600 kilometers, is located. Except for those properties which are characteristic for a stratosphere, this layer is characterized by a significant degree of ionization of air. Vacuum sphere, reaching up to height about 1000 kilometers, is characterized by a strong degree of underpressure of air. Practically, up to this height, it is possible to find out only separate elements of the air environment. Thus, the air environment has the greatest density at the surface of the ground and being gradually referred is lost at height about 1000 kilometers. It is natural that for our usual life the greatest value has a troposphere, the nearest to the ground light of an atmosphere. We most closely join the air of troposphere and its properties render on us the most direct influence. Now are intensively studied properties of air weights of other layers, but for a human body they cannot directly influence as existence of the person in those layers without of devices. This artificial condition is impossible. On this slide you can see importance of the atmospheric air for health of the person. Air is necessary for maintenance of processes of respiration and oxygen provision, thermal exchange, provision of body heat emission by different waves, transmissions of optical portion of solar spectrum, for example visible, ultraviolet and infrared rays to Earth's surface, orientation in environment space through sense organ, perception of visual and acoustical signals of environment. Air is the most important factor of hardening. Next, the air mass influences on electrical, energetical, hydrological, and geological process of Earth's surface. The air surrounding promotes rotation of the water, oxygen, carbonic gas, and nitrogen in the nature. Air is one of the most important sources of the raw materials. Extraction nitrogen, oxygen, hydrogen, helium, neon, and other gases are produced from it. Air is bare, and the condition of extension, infection, and toxic admixture. Let's consider a chemical compound of atmospheric air and influence of its components of an organism of the person. It is natural that we shall examine the structure of pure air as a full specific lecture we were devoted to a question of pollution of the air environment and influence of this pollution of the person. Air represents the mechanical mix of gases consisting of oxygen, approximately 21%, nitrogen, approximately 78%, carbonic gas, up to 0.04%, and group of inert gases, about 1%. If an atmosphere occurs, constant circulation of gases, the person and animals at breathe absorb oxygen and breathe out the carbon dioxide. The same processes occur at any oxidizing process, burning, decay, rotting, etc. The vegetative cover of a terrestrial surface absorbs carbonic acid and allocated oxygen. These processes each other counterbalanced long time. There is a constantly of structure of the air environment to which promoted the moving of air weights, providing uniform hashing of air was kept. It is necessary to note that the chemical compound of air varies depending on height of an air little. So, at height of 28 kilometers, air contains 20.39% of oxygen, on a sea level 20.93%. Oxygen. Passing to the consideration of separate components of the air environment and their influence on an organism of the person, it is necessary to note that the most important component in structure of air is oxygen. First of all, it is necessary for process of burning, decay, and other oxidizing process occurring in the nature, which provide existence of a life on the ground. Besides, all oxidizing processes in the organism occur at direct precipitation of oxygen. Therefore, it is a vital component, and its absent existence of the organism becomes impossible. Thus, it is rather important to establish up to that degree the reduction in quantity of oxygen in air without infringement of physiological functions of an organism is possible. It is natural that any fluctuation of air of the contents of oxygen are transferred by organism to receive without serious consequence, as the organism possesses rather powerful compensator opportunities. It is by practical consideration established that degrees in quantity of oxygen up to 60 and even 50% at normal pressure, it is transferred to inhaled air and organism rather without serious consequence through the compensator mechanisms that are in a condition of a pressure, straightening the lung ventilation, cardio activity, etc. The person can quickly exist even in atmosphere with the contents of oxygen, about 10%, and people, for example pilots, while training to oxygen insufficiency up to 8-7%. It is natural that the compensator mechanism of an organism are in the extreme degree of strain. The further reduction in the contents of oxygen in inhaled air result in a fast exhaustion of compensator mechanism of an organism and its destruction. The central nervous system is especially sensitive to lack of oxygen. The compensation by the organism of oxygen insufficiency occur for the account. Increase the lung ventilation, increase and a deepening of respiratory movements, increase of blood circulation, increase of systolic volume of cardiac contraction, and increase in their frequency. Increase in the mass of circulating blood, circulation overload due to its output from the pot, increase in the mass and format elements of blood providing transpiration of oxygen, raise the number of erythrocytes and hemoglobin in blood, and etc. Inhalation of air with the raised contents of oxygen is transferred by an organism of the person well. Inhalation, even some pure oxygen at normal pressure, does not result in occurrence of pathological change in an organism. Only at long breathing by pure oxygen, some drying action on mucous membranes of respiratory waves is marked that can lead to the irritation and occurrence of the inflammatory phenomena. Inhalation of pure oxygen under the raised pressure, 3 or 4 atmospheres and more, results in the pathological phenomena on the part of the central nervous system, shown as spasms and oxygen intoxication. At usual condition of life, such phenomena do not meet and can arise at use of oxygen equipment in case of its malfunction. And we are immersing. Carbonic gas. In air, it is little carbonic gas. In atmospheric air is only 0.03 up to 0.04%, and in air of premises up to 10th shares of percent. However, it has a very big hygienic value. First of all, it is necessary to note its role in maintenance of ecological equilibrium of an environment on a global scale. For a long time, the oxidizing and regenerative process occurring in the nature mutually each other counterbalanced by virtue of that the structure of air practically did not vary. However, in connection with the technical progress, sharply increasing amount of engines of internal combustion and other power installation, the quantity of oxidizing process on globe has considerably increased. At the same time, as a result of urbanization and development of the industry, the amount of the green plantings, being the basic consumers of carbonic acid, has substantially decreased. Last year's growth of concentration of carbonic acid was outlined in atmospheric air. Scientists consider that if increase of quantity of carbonic acid in air will occur, and further in the nature there can be so-called halted effect, as a carbonic acid which in taking place in an atmosphere retains a long-wave path of infrared radiation radiated from a terrestrial surface on the space. In the result, there will be an increase of mid-annual temperature of atmospheric air that will lead the heaving of polar glaciers, increase of a level of world ocean, and consequently to flooding a significant part of a terrestrial surface. For air of premises, the contents of carbonic gas has sanitary indicative value. In premises, there are people in air various products of life activity of a human body act. The exhaled air sets this carbonic acid and water pairs, evaporation form surface of skin and mucous membranes of respiratory waves, in structure of which they are products of decomposition of slime, sweat, skin, fat, etc. In result, in air concentration of carbonic acid increases. There are ammonia, aldehydes, ketones, and other badly smelling gases, increases humidity, dust, and microbic impurity of air, that as a whole air is characterized as stuffy, influences on the state of health, serviceability, and health of people. On concentration of carbonic acid in such air, it is possible to define a degree of its general impurity. Therefore, carbonic acid serves as sanitary parameters of cleanness of air in inhabited and public premises. Air is considered fresh if concentration of carbonic acid does not exceed 0.1%. This size also is considered maximum permissible for air in inhabited and public premises. Besides, it is necessary to take into account that factor that carbonic gas is heavier than air and can accumulate in the bottom parts of the closed space not exposed to intensive ventilation. Most important, it for those places there increased oxidizing process, for example the fermentative tubs, the deserted means of well at the bottom of which are decaying or hardening savages, and etc. In such places, the concentration of carbonic acid can reach the big sizes and represent hazard to the health and existence of the person. If the concentration of carbonic gas in inhaled air exceeds 3%, existence in such atmosphere becomes dangerous to health. Concentration of carbon dioxide about 10% is considered dangerous to life. At concentration of 20%, this is a paralysis of the respiratory center within several seconds. Nitrogen. It is considered that nitrogen gas indifferent and in air plays a role of filter. However, such representation is correct only at normal pressure. Inhalation of air and the raised pressure, nitrogen starts to have narcotic effects. This action is the most clearest shown at pressure of air of 9 and more atmosphere. It is of great importance as at work of divers of the big depths. It is necessary to submit them with the air and a high pressure, sometimes exceeding 10 atmospheres. At work in such condition, in behavior of diver, cause less cheerfulness, infringement of coordination of movements, excessive garrulity, and other displays of euphoria is marked. It also is displays of narcotic action of nitrogen. Now at works of divers on the big depths, for breath, use not air, use a specially prepared helium-oxygen mix, and nitrogen, other name is nitrogen, is replaced with more inert gases. On this slide, you can see table of chemical composition of air, and you can see the nitrogen, oxygen, argon, carbon dioxide, and other gases, these symbols, and percentage by value. On these slides, you can see physical parameters of atmospheric air. Which physical parameters? We know temperature, humidity, air velocity and direction of the moving of air, atmospheric pressure, electrical condition and radioactivity of the air. Atmospheric pressure. Apparently from the previous statement of a material, the layer of air above a terrestrial surface is distributed up to height about 1000 kilometers. This air is kept at the surface of the ground by force of terrestrial gravitation, has a certain weight. On the surface of the ground and all subjects which are taking place at its surface, this air greater the pressure equal of 1033 gram divided quadrat centimeters. Hence, upon all surface of a body of the person having the area of 1.8 quadratic meters, this air accordingly puts pressure about 16 up to 18 tons. Usually, we don't feel it, as under the same pressure gases as dissolved of liquid and fabric of an organism, and from within counterbalance external pressure upon the surface of a body. However, a change of external atmospheric pressure by virtue of weather conditions, the equilibration of it from within needs sometimes necessarily for rains of reduction of amount of gases dissolved in an organism. During this time, the person can feel some feeling of discomfort as at change of atmospheric pressure for on millimeters column, the general pressure upon a surface of a body changed to 10 kilograms. Especially feel this change people suffering as chronic diseases of the bone, muscular, cardiovascular system, etc. Besides, the person can meet the change of barometric pressure during the activity at ride on height, at diving, casting works, etc. Therefore, it is necessary for doctors to know that influenza renders on an organism as downturn and increase of atmospheric pressure. The person meets a low blood pressure, mainly at rise of heat. Thus, a mere factor which influences the person oxygen insufficiency is. At weight of 6 km, atmospheric pressure is already twice lower that on a sea level and at a height of 60 km in 10 times. Through percentage of oxygen in atmospheric air, as we have noted earlier, this raising of weight does not vary almost. However, in connection with a reduction in the general pressure, the partial pressure of oxygen is decreased. The share of pressure which is provided due to the oxygen in the general pressure. Let's difference more it is appear that exactly the partial pressure of oxygen provides diffusion of oxygen from alveolar air in venous blood. More thoroughly, this transition occurs due difference the partial pressure of oxygen in venous blood and in alveolar air. This difference also known as diffusion pressure. At small diffusion pressure, they get the hypoxemia, which is a major factor of development of high altitude and mountain illness. The symptoms of this illness is rather similar to the symptoms of the general oxygen insufficiency described by as early. Dyspnea, palpitation, pale skin, integument and acute cyanosis, dizziness, weakness, fast vacuum, sleepiness, nausea, vomiting, loss of consequence, initial attributes of high altitudes or mortal illnesses start to be shown already from height 3 up to 4 kilometers. Depending on the partial pressure of oxygen in air at different height, distinguish the following zones. First, an indifferent zone up to 2 kilometers, a zone of full compensation 4 to 4 kilometers, a zone of incomplete compensation 4 up to 6 kilometers, a critical zone 6 up to 8 kilometers, and the fatal zone is higher than 8 kilometers. Naturally, that division in the such zones is conditional as different people differently transfer oxygen insufficiency. The big role that is played a degree of organism training. The reduction of barometric pressure of rise of weight results in excess of oxygen influence or the disturbance in the condition of organism. Diving and caisson works, the person is compelled to carry out at the raised pressure. Healthy people transition to the raised pressure rather without serious consequence. Only short-term unpleasant sensations are sometimes marked. Thus, there are equilibration of pressure in all internal cavities of an organism to external pressure, and also the solution of nitrogen in liquids and tissue of an organism according to its partial pressure in inhaled air. On each additional atmosphere of pressure in an organism, it is dissolved in addition approximately on 1 liter of nitrogen. Decompression is a responsible moment at such works, and on its need of significant amount of time, the schedule of work in a caisson at the pressure equal to 3 additional atmosphere. The duration of half shirt, the period of compression, work in a caisson, and period of decompression. It is natural that at working caissons, this more high pressure, the period of decompression is considerably extended, and accordingly the period of work in the working chamber is reduced. The next I want to talk about movement of air. or other names is velocity. As a result of regular heating of a air surface, the places with the raised and lowered atmospheric pressure are greater. That results in moving air streams. Movement of air promotes preservation of a constancy and relative uniformity of the air environment, and equilibration of temperatures, hashing of gases, and also promotes feedback of heat by an organism. At the layout of the occupied places, the called windrows, representing a graphic representation of repeatability of a direction of winds in the given district for a certain time interval has special value. At planning territory in the occupied places, an industrial zone, it is necessarily situated in windly side which with reference to dwelling zone. Velocity of movement of air in an atmosphere can vary from the full calm till hurricanes over 29 km divided seconds. At dwelling and public premises, the velocity of movement of air is normalized within the limits of 0.2 up to 0.4 meter per second. Too small velocity of movement of air testify about bad ventilation of premises. Big, more than 0.5 meter seconds, are greeted with unpleasant sensation of a draft. Other physical parameters of atmospheric air is humidity. Air of troposphere contains a significant amount of water streams which are formed as a result of evaporation from a surface of water, ground, vegetation, etc. These pairs pass from the modular condition in another influencing of the general humidity dynamics of an atmosphere. The amount of moisture in air with rise of heat quickly decreases. So, ahead of 8 kilometers, humidity of air makes all about 1% from that quantity of moisture which is defined at ground level. For the person, relative humidity of air, which shows a degree of saturation of air in water pairs, has great value. It plays a big role at realization of thermoregulation of an organism. The optimum size of relative humidity of air considers 40 up to 60%, allowable 30 up to 70%. At low humidity of air, for example 15-10%, occur more intensive dehydration of an organism. In this case, the raised thirst, dryness of mucous membranes of respiratory waves, occurrence of cracks on them with the subsequent inflammatory phenomena, etc. is felt. That sensation at patients with high temperature are especially burdensome. Therefore, in words, at such patients it is necessary to pay special attention to microclimatic condition. High humidity of air adversely affects on thermoregulation of an organism, complicating or straightening of heat output depending on temperature of air. The person, what is the temperature? Next is very important factor of air is temperature. The person has adapted to existence within the limits of the certain value of temperature. At the surface of the ground, The temperature of air depending on breadth of districts and a season of year change in limits about 100 grades Celsius. This rise of heat, the temperature of air is gradually reduced, approximately on a 0.56 degree Celsius on every 100 meters of rise. This size refers to as a normal temperature gradient. However, by virtue of special development meteorological condition, low overcast, fog, this temperature gradient is sometimes broken, and there comes so-called temperature inversion, when the top layers of air become warmer than lower. It has a partial value in the decision of the problems connected to pollution of atmospheric air. Occurrence of atmospheric inversion reduces the opportunities for dilution of pollution through out into the air and promotes creation of the high concentration. For consideration of question of influence of temperature of air on an organism of the person, it is necessary to recollect the basic mechanism of thermoregulation. And on this slide you can see influences of physical factors of atmospheric air on organism and health. Firstly, it's thermoregulation, influence of areons, electromagnetic waves, and radioactivity on organism, hypothermia, heat stroke, cooling, frostbite, complex influence of meteor factor of organism, mountain, high altitude, caisson sickness, barotraumas. Thermoregulation, one of the mere conditions for normal ability to life of a human body, is preservation of a constante of a body temperature. Under usual conditions, the person on the average losses in day about 2,400 up to 2,700 kilocalories. About 90% of this heat it is given to the environmental through the skin. The others of 10–50% are spent for heating food, drink and inhaled air, and also on evaporation from a surface of mucous membranes of respiratory waves, etc. Hence, the most important wave of heat output is the surface of a body. From a surface of a body, rarely it is given as radiation, infrared radiation, convection by direct contact to surrounding subject and adjoining to the surface of a body by a layer of air, and evaporation, a sweat of other liquid. In usual comfortable condition at room temperature in easy clothes, a ratio of a degree of heat output that these waves are following. For example, first radiation up to 45–6%, convection 34%, and evaporation 25%. You can see on the slides. Using these mechanisms of heat output, the organism can substantially protect itself from influence of high temperatures and prevent overheating. This mechanism of thermoregulation refer to physical, except that they are still chemical mechanisms, which consists that at influences of low on high temperatures process of a metabolism in an organism are changed and result in increase or decrease of heat production. Solar radiation. The sun is an energy source, heat and light on globe. The solar energy heats up a surface on the earth, causes evaporation of a moisture, formation of air currents, and the change of weather connected to this phenomena and a climate in the given region. Solar energy, which surface has temperature, is very high temperature, approximately 600,000 degree Celsius degree, represent electromagnetic fluctuation. The sunlight has three sun rays: ultraviolet beams, visible lights, and infrared lights. Ratio of which in the general solar radiation by total energy makes 47% respectively. The sunlight, being a source of life in the earth, renders direct influence on the thermal condition of a human organism, a function of the visual analysis on a vitamin exchange and non-specific resistance of an organism. The biological importance of ultraviolet, infrared radiation and visible light varies. Ultraviolet radiation, intensity of this radiation reaching Earth's surface depends on the heat of sun standing. If heat of a sun stays above horizon, less than 250, the most active biological ultraviolet radiation does not reach Earth's surface. For the man, ultraviolet beams, this wavelength from 200 up to 400 nanometers, have the greatest hygienic value. By character of biological action, they are divided into three zones. A, these have laid from 400 up to 320 nanometers. B, 320 up to 280 nanometers. And C, area C, 220 up to 180 nanometers. Zone A, sample or fluorescent zone. Ultraviolet beams on this zone cause melanin formation in the skin, the specific pigment causing darkening of the skin. Zone B, or erythematosus zone of ultraviolet radiation. Beam of this zone cause skin erythema and also promote formation of vitamin D. Biological role of vitamin D, as known, it is an absorption of calcium and the phosphorus in the gastrointestinal tract and calcium phosphate deposition in a bone tissue. Zone C, or bactericidal. Ultraviolet beams of this zone cause death of microorganisms, due to which are used for disinfection of water, air and surface of subjects. The greatest bactericidal effect is marked at ultraviolet beams wavelength about 265 nanometers used in medicine. Ultraviolet rays of radiation of zone C cause effects at a level of protein of cells nuclei and differs in the high bactericidal activity. Radiation of this range practically is absent in the solar beams reaching Earth, as it is absorbed by atmosphere. Therefore, to its reception in condition of the Earth apply artificial source bactericidal lamps. Beams of this range are undesirable impurity to ultraviolet source intended for an irradiation of the man. presence of them should not exceed 5% from all stream. Middle wave radiation, cooperation mainly with molecular to protoplasm fibers of cells. It is considered less that protein of protoplasm carry out function of additional filters, protecting nucleus protein of cells from damage. The superficial layer of a skin is characterized by a low factor of permeability for ultraviolet beams. Nevertheless, ultraviolet beams of a zone B are capable to penetrate in a skin deep into 1 mm. Changing frequency, rate, duration, and intensity of beam influence, it is possible to receive opposite effects. To factors of biological influences ultraviolet radiation, it is necessary to attribute long, up to 3 weeks, the period of after effects. For the characteristic of skin sensitivity to ultraviolet wave radiation, the threshold of erythematose sensitivity or minimal erythematose dose is used. Factor influences upon intensity of ultraviolet radiation. It's 3 group factors: geographical factors, weather condition, planning, and building factors. And on the slides you can see effects of human organism. When we talked about human effects of human organism, we should say about 2 group factors: biogenic, healthy, and abiogenic. Biogenic, fortifying health, giving erythema, sunburn, vitamin D formation, and abiogenic, unhealthy, is burns, photodermatosis, cancerogenic action, photoallergy, phototoxicosis, keratoconjunctivitis, photokeratitis, and others. The important role in maintenance of organism stability to ultraviolet beams of radiation plays the organization of a balanced diet consisting in increase of reception of protein, vitamins, mineral substance, and polyunsaturated fat acids, since they are strenuously spent by organism at synthesis of melanin. Overradiation by the ultraviolet beams can promote an aggravation of some chronic diseases, in particular tuberculosis, rheumatism, nephritis, stomach ulcer, and duodenal gout. It is especially at people of overage and senior age groups. It is now also that the excessive irradiation beams have provoked a skin cancer. And which preventive maintenance of the storage and the back influence to ultraviolet radiation? Firstly, usage of the solage bath and artificial irradiation, beach, solarium, erythemic lamp. The second is rational feeding. The third, fights this atmospheric contamination, including warning the destruction of ozone layer. The fourth, rational planning and building activity. And last, 5, is usage of the facilities of individual protection, special pasts, creams, account of the medical contraindication, and others. And I want to say about infrared radiation. Infrared radiation represents the electromagnetic fluctuation, rendering basically thermal action. Their source are all bodies. This temperature of the man is natural and industrial condition. The thermal effects of infrared radiation depends on power and a spectrum of radiation. The short-wave part of infrared radiation up to 1040 nanometers will penetrate on depths of proteins up to the 3 centimeters and causes the uniform warning up. The long wave parts of infrared radiation 1400 up to 1300 nanometers is laid basically in the top of the epidermis and causes fast rise in the temperature of skin and to erythema. Specific reaction of an organism is reply to an infrared component of solar radiation is thermal solar impact. Victims register the headache, excitation, in heavy cases convulsions, and loss on consciousness are marked rise of body temperature up to 40 up to 42 degree. The reason of it is accumulation of heat in an organism. Owing to that, there is a frustration of its function. Heat strokes frequently come to lethal end. Climate. Climate is a long-term weather tendency within the geographical latitude and the longitude of the given district, relief, character of spreading surface of soil. Weather is a condition of the physical phenomena in the atmosphere for the given moment. Weather varies with season, months. Weather induces fluctuation in mobility of people with these or those illnesses. The autumn-spring period is characterized by catarrhal virus diseases, tonsillitis, flus, bronchitis, cardiovascular dystonias, crises. The summer period promotes growth of gastrointestinal infection, dysfunction, alimentary and non-alimentary poisoning, overheated solar and heat stroke, and others. For catarrhal diseases prevention, use a method of hardening through cold and thermal reception. For gastrointestinal illness prevention, necessarily personal and public hygiene, observance of food preparation technology, water of open spaces, desert, mountains, steppes, which promote formation of original aid, which are used with a medical purpose in bioclimatology. For goal of treatment by a climate, it is necessary to take into account physiological processes of adaptation and acclimatization, the testimony and contra-testimony. At illnesses of respiratory ways, steppe open spaces, coniferous fields, mountain air, hydrochloric mines are good. The disease of cardiovascular system need hardwood, water, open spaces. At a homogeneous climate, adaptation occurs without serious consequence. At a contrast climate, north-south, occur acclimatization in 3 phases. Acute climate change and purpose bioclimatology is not recommended as far as can come to aggravation to illness. More rapid of attack with a lethal outcome. Acclimatization is a complex social and biological process of active adaptation to new climatic condition, a special case of adaptation. On this slide you can see climatic zones by Bergen. It's 12 types. On these slides you can see climatic types on geographic lines and average annual temperature. Climatic belts in this on this table you can see 7 climatic belts: tropical, hot, warm, temperate, cold, frosty, polar. And geographical wise average temperature on these climatic belts. On these slides you can see climatic types of Azerbaijan Republic and his hygienic features. Generally is 8 climatic types. Is semi-arid and dry steppe climate, temperate warm with smaller precipitation in winter, temperate warm with similar precipitation in summer, temperate warm with even precipitation in the summer. And others is cool with smaller precipitation in summer, in winter, cool climate with high moisture in winter, and mountain climate of the tundra. On this slide you can see our map of Azerbaijan and climatic types by Shekhlinsky and Madadzadeh. And on this slide you can see medical clinical types of the climate and their hygienic characteristics. On this slide you can see 3 groups of medical clinical types of the climate and hygienic characteristics. The first, sporadic climate, Sia and Trimbe, climate of moderate and warm zones. The second, medical and general health improvement climate, irritating climate, cool, freezing, high altitude. Main reason of meteorotropical reaction. On this slide you can see aperiodic change of meteorological factor, transmission of cool and warm weather fronts, formation of cyclones and anticyclones, and geomagnetic change. The mechanism of development of meteorotropical reaction is very important for us for development meteopathic reaction. On this slide you can see frequency of the appearance pathological symptoms in different weather conditions. A diseased person with cardiovascular pathology in favorable weather condition, in unfavorable weather condition. And you can see symptoms of these diseases: weakness, sleeplessness, heart rate, headache, dizziness, and others. And you can see amount of symptoms, and generally symptoms, amount of symptoms is change, and in unfavorable weather conditions amount of symptoms is increase. And acute, when we say about what is acclimatization. Acclimatization is a complex social and biological process of active adaptation to new climatic condition, a special case of adaptation. Acclimatization has 3 phases. Initial phase of the physiological strain, which is lasts for 7-10 days, and is characterized by the strain of thermal regulation of the basic and working energy metabolism. The second phase of reorganization of the dynamic stereotype, it can process on two waves. In the first one, favorably processing, which may promoted by social hygienic action. The second phase smoothly passes into the third one. Adverse current of the second phase generates marked adaptation, meteorosis, meteorological arthralgia, acute attacks of chronic diseases. However, with relevant treatment and prophylactic and hygienic action in both cases, it is possible to enter the third phase. The third phase is the phase of stable acclimatization. It is characterized by stability of metabolism processes, absence of nutrition disorders, normal working ability, usual mobility level, etc. The fastest change of the weather situation with sharp change of meteorological factors parameters within a day is observed during passage of front. And you can see on these slides, and in this slide you can see hygienic action for acceleration and facilitation of acclimatization. It's firstly it's rational planning, observance rulings of personal hygiene, rational feeding, choice of the rational clothes, shoes and headdress, medical control of health, medical preventive action. The climate and weather have many sides hygienic value. Healthy people with good advanced adaptive mechanism as a rule are meteorological stable, even at acute change of weather. Together within a part of people, in particular patients, elderly meteorology, so among patients with hypertonic illness, meteorological sensible are 50 up to 80%. At meteorological sensible people, abrupt weather change causes meteorological reaction of various expressiveness, down to dangerous for life. Therefore, the important value has a medical estimation and weather forecast. On this slide, you can see macroclimate. What is a macroclimate? Hygienic meaning of macroclimate. Macroclimate is climate with a close to terrestrial surface or limited terrain, the woods, cities and others, or closet placement, apartment, auditorium, hospital rooms and others. And what is the hygienic meaning of macroclimate? Choice of territory for construction, dwelling and public buildings, estimation of weather conditions, choosing the place for sanatorium and spa treatment, rest and organism hardening. On this slide, you can see recommended level of microclimate in the room, in the workshop. For example, this is not dependent on season. At cold season, the temperature of microclimate in the room is recommended 18 up to 22, 23 degree. Relative humidity 40 up to 60. Air velocity 0.1 up to 0.3 meter per second. For workshop, at cold season, temperature is maybe increase 60 up to 24 degree, relative humidity same 40 up to 60%, and air velocity 0.1 up to 0.3 meter per second. And on this slide you can see what is the macroflora of atmospheric air. The air is not a favorable environment for microorganisms. The main source of air pollution populated areas is soil microorganisms. However, getting into the air, many microorganisms can for some time be in a viable state. Among them are a large group of pathogenic and conditionally pathogenic microorganisms. A person with upper respiratory tract infection identifies microorganism by speaking, sneezing, coughing, etc. Through the air is transferred to a group of diseases which is called respiratory tract infection. These airborne dust and airborne transmission mechanisms. Microflora of atmospheric air. In the air, Staphylococcus and Streptococcus detected only in 3.7% of samples taken in areas with large concentration of people. Among the microorganisms dominate species living in the soil. In the air are mainly found three groups of microorganisms: Chromogenicoccus, soil spore and putrefactive microorganisms, mold fungi, and yeasts. The atmospheric air is a constantly self-purification process occurs. This process is due to the precipitation, insolation, temperature effects, and other factors. In turn, the air itself a factor of purification in indoor air. The main source of the air pollution by pathogenic species, bacillicars. The level of microbial contamination mainly depends on population density, movement of people activity, the sanitary conditions of the premises, include dust pollution, ventilation rate, cleaning method, degree of illumination, and other conditions. So, regular airing and wet cleaning reduce air pollution by 30 times. Compared to the control room, the air self-cleaning of closest premises is not happening. And which measure for the prevention of infection by air? Basic rule is then coughing or sneezing. Cover your nose and mouth with a handkerchief. Turn it away from the man stationed. Wearing gas mask during epidemic. It's very actually for present day. Compliance with the cleanliness in the premises by regular wet cleaning. Regulatory compliance air and the cubic capacity of residential and public buildings. Remediation of air and the premises of health facilities using disinfectant and bactericidal lamp. To reduce the number of microorganisms in indoor air to the following tools: chemical treatment with ozone, nitrogen dioxide, spraying lactic acid. The next, mechanical, passing of the through a special filter, and physical, using ultraviolet radiation, using bactericidal lamp. And now I want you to watch a video about air pollution. I prepared this video. I think it's very interesting for you. Please, you can see. So this is our lecture came to an end. See you at the next lecture. Thank you for attention. Good luck, student.